Okay, so typically I don't, especially from the 80s, I'm not really a big fan of sequels, especially the movies that have like a ton of sequels, because odds are they're going to be pretty bad, right? However, I'm going to talk about one which I think is actually pretty good, considering it had some big shoes to follow. Now, it wasn't directed by Clive Barker; it was actually directed by another guy, but it actually took the story and kind of fleshed out a few things and added a few details, which I thought was pretty interesting. And it for what it was actually pretty good. And I mean, like I said, it's one of the rare cases where I think the sequel is pretty decent. I would say it's better than Hellraiser, but it's certainly pretty close. And of course, I'm talking about Hellraiser 2. Now, it came out, I think, what, a year, maybe 2 years after the original. And I remember when it came out, I actually went to the video store the day it was released, and I actually I begged my mom, and she let me rent it, and I took it home and watched it, and it delivered. I mean, it really I mean, I thought it was really good, and I've watched it recently. It's actually still pretty good. I mean, if you're a fan of the series, especially the early movies, it's pretty good. It still holds up. But anyway, so like the original, the movie starts out giving a little tidbit as to who Pinhead is, right? And of course, now he doesn't really explain his character fully until you get into the third movie, which, frankly, is probably the only thing about that movie that's actually any good. The rest of the movie I thought was just crap. But the explanation of who Pinhead was and how he became Pinhead I thought was pretty interesting, where he was a British Army officer or whatever. But it shows that he's some sort of a colonial officer, probably serving in like India, maybe Africa or something like that. And of course, this radio's going, and he gets the somehow gets his hands on the box, and he unravels it. He figures out the unlocks it, and of course, immediately you see these chains come out of nowhere, and you see all this like weird stuff happening to him, like all these hammers hammering the nails in, and like his blood's getting transferred out with some blue fluid, and all, I mean all this other like just weird, crazy stuff. And you hear that deep, lumbering British voice say, the pain, the pain, the suffering, right? That's the opening of the movie, right? Well, the movie starts with this insane asylum. Or actually, it starts immediately after the first one stops, and you get Kirsty, and Kirsty is released from the hospital. And none of the characters from the original are around, not at first. Now, later on they would be introduced. But anyway, she goes to this hospital, and she meets this doctor who is played by the guy who played the officer in Aliens. He's a Canadian actor, and he's pretty good. I've seen him on a couple television roles. He's a pretty decent actor. But anyway, them two kind of they kind of strike up a friendship, if you will. And well, there's this other doctor who is the head of, I think, neurosurgery or something like that. I mean, because you see him, and he's all about giving lobotomies and stuff like that. Which, of course, at that time they were pretty much outlawed. But I mean, it's a horror movie, so we'll just kind of roll with it, right? But he likes doing all this like experimental type surgery. Well, secretly, this other doctor uh, is looking for that box. He somehow heard about the Lemon Shaw's box, and he wants. And there's a scene in the movie where he goes into this room, and there's like a whole bunch of different boxes. I don't know if that's supposed to imply that there's other worlds, or maybe that there's a bunch of fakes and there's only one real one. I mean, who knows? I mean, who knows? But this guy's obviously some sort of a he's some sort of a uh, he's kind of the classic. He's the classic um, mad scientist, if you will, and he comes across this girl who has selective mutism, right? And she's really good at solving puzzles. She's really, I mean, she has a penchant for that sort of thing. So of course he starts exploiting her, and he gets her to actually open the box up. Now, of course, immediately, and like I said, this is one of the interesting things I found about Pinhead is Pinhead just doesn't kill people just to be doing it. I mean, he's not a mindless killer. And as soon as the Cenobites arrive and they see that girl, the Pinhead says something. I mean, I'm kind of paraphrasing. He says something like, "Well, these are not the hands of You know, these aren't the hands that open the box. The hands that open this box are filled with desire, meaning that Pinhead knows that somebody else forced that girl to open the box up, right? And somehow Kirsty gets pulled in too. And anyway, her and that the girl that's got mutism starts wandering around. And of course, the realm called the Labyrinth is like this kind of maze world, and there's like, you know, kind of danger at every corner. And I thought it was pretty interesting how I can't remember if Clive Barker actually wrote the script or not, but whoever wrote the script did a pretty good job of fleshing that whole concept out, right? And anyway, Pinhead actually allows Kirsty to explore. And he says it in a very mocking way. He's like, explore, explore, you know, like that, knowing that there's like all sorts of weird stuff. And they go to like, first off, Kirsty finds the room where I believe it was Frank. She finds Frank's room, right, where he's in eternal torture, I guess. And of course, you see all these like beds and these women having sex with him and all that. And then she somehow gets away from him, and she runs into Julia, right? And then of course Julia also is trying to get out, and she's trying to pull a Frank and get the hell out of there. And so anyway, Julia and Kirsty start going at it. Well, meanwhile, this doctor is trying to figure out, you know, what the big deal is. You know, what's the big deal? And of course, he finds out in a very big way, because he actually gets pulled in, and Julia throws him into one of those chambers, and he turns into a Cenobite, right? And he like after he, you know, gets through with all this like torturous stuff, and, you know, it gets drilled into his head, and he's got this like little tripod thing that carries him around, all this like weird stuff. And of course, he goes in there and starts battling Pinhead, and the first thing out of his mouth is, "The doctor's in the house," or something weird like that, right? I mean, it's kind of hokey and kind of funny, but if you see what I'm talking about, it's pretty ingenuous how it's done. So anyway, Julia gets killed, right, and the girl is trapped by the doctor, and you know, Pinhead is basically rendered uh, unusable. I mean, you know, at first it's kind of implied that he gets killed, but of course we know that's not true because they did another sequel, so you know they figured out a way to bring him back. But he gets, and of course it becomes a battle with the doctor, and there's a scene where Kirsty is. She runs off really quick. She comes back, and of course Julia shows up. And of course the little girl's all freaking out because she knows that Julia is evil. And she takes the girl's hand and pulls her back in. And of course, that's what Kirsty did, is basically took Julia's skin off and was wearing it. Right? It was like total like Hannibal Lecter type stuff. Right? It was really. I mean, it sounds kind of hokey, but the way they do it in the movie is actually kind of cool. Right? And so, like I said, I got to give props to whoever made that. I can't remember exactly who it was, who directed or whatever, but they did a pretty good job. I'm not entirely sure if Clive Barker worked on the script or produced it or whatever, but it kept pretty close. It just kind of expanded out the original story. Now, it shied away from the themes of overt sexuality, although there's quite a few scenes where Julie is making out with this guy, with the doctor, and her skin, she's like skinless. She's basically wrapped up in bandages, and of course that kind of a gross out scene or whatever. But yeah, it's pretty insane, and it's definitely one I definitely recommend. Like I said, I very rarely do sequels, but this one I think, especially the old fashioned kind. Now, of course, when they start doing like trilogies and stuff like that, they got a hair better, unless you're talking about the Matrix or something like that. But anyway, and this one, the sequel is actually pretty good. Now, the third one, I mean, like I said, the when he gets to the sequence where Pinhead explains who he is, I thought that was pretty interesting. I thought that was pretty fascinating. But the rest of the movie, I thought was just pretty bad. I thought it was pretty crappy. So anyway, hopefully this video will shed some light, and I definitely highly recommend Hellraiser 2. And if you get a chance, go see it, and I shall talk to you later.